Ladies and gentlemen, the synergy between these two exotics is incredible, and there really is no build required. Just pairing Vex Mythoclast with the Rain of Fire Warlock exotic boots yields extremely impressive results. But I do have a setup that I like to run that in my opinion takes it way past impressive. If it sounds like something you'd be into, let's go ahead and have a look. Rain of Fire's intrinsic trait, Solar Fusilier, has three main functions. 1, it reloads all equipped weapons via the Icarus Dash air dodge. 2, it improves the airborne effectiveness of fusion rifles and linear fusion rifles. And 3, it grants the radiant damage buff when securing a kill with the fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle. All very strong benefits. Now, if only these things weren't so stinking ugly. If you're into camo, I mean, knock yourself out, but ornament please. But anyway, then we have Vex Mythoclast. It's a fusion rifle, which is a bold-faced lie. In its standard fire mode, it's basically a 390 RPM auto rifle. Once you get 6 kills, you can activate Temporal Unlimiter, turning Vex into a linear fusion rifle for 3 shots. If you have the Catalyst unlocked, you'll also see bonus damage, accuracy, and stability for a short duration after a kill. And like I said, this is a fusion rifle, and you can probably feel the breeze from my air quotes, but it does pair seamlessly with Rain of Fire. For the rest of the components, I usually try to keep my builds pretty simple for the most part, and while this one is in some respects, in others, it isn't. A lot of the freedom does come into subclass menus. We want Dawnblade with Icarus Dash to make the most out of Rain of Fire. And you're definitely going to want to take Ember of Solace to increase the duration of our already built-in Radiant buff to 14 seconds. Outside of that, I mean, do what you want, build into what you value, play how you want to play. And while I do recommend Heat Rises for the second aspect, mainly for the double dash, the world isn't going to come crashing down around you if you want to run Touch of Flame. Moving on to our other two weapons. In the kinetic slot, it's really your call. I'm going to run Riptide, not necessarily because it's a fusion rifle, which is a bonus, but I really dig the gun. In the heavy slot, go solar if you can. Elemental diversity may be an issue if the match game modifier is on. If not, a solar heavy will definitely be worth your while. My personal recommendation, the Ascendancy rocket launcher, and I'll talk about why coming up. For your Guardian stat line, don't worry about it all that much. I do think having high resilience in general is extremely important, but none of these are really factoring into the build. For our armor mod selections, we'll start out with the biggie, Font of Might, 3 copies. Overkill? Maybe, but who really wants to underkill it? When picking up an elemental well, Font of Might provides a 25% damage boost for 11 seconds for weapons whose element matches that of the well. So, a solar well equals a solar weapon damage boost. The buff stacks with all other buffs, but the mods don't inherently stack on their own. We're going to need elemental time dilation slotted in somewhere so that the multiple copies play nice together. It does slot on stasis armor only, and while it doesn't increase the damage, it will up the duration from 11 seconds to 21 seconds. A much more user-friendly window, which refreshes with every well picked up. To generate these wells, currently I am going to be using the Flame Harvesting Artifact mod. In future seasons, we'll just have to adjust our well generation methods. So this isn't a build that's going to be dead in the water without it. But it is here currently, so we might as well make use of it. Solar Exotic Final Blows create elemental wells, and it actually does need to be a double kill to see a well pop. And there is a short internal cooldown timer on the mod, but it does work pretty effectively. And if you are bringing along Ascendancy, 1 Harmonic Siphon mod on your helmet. We're going to want that for the orb generation that fuels the Explosive Light perk. Past that, my recommendation is to try the build out, see how it works for you, and then make any tweaks, changes, additions, or adjustments as you see fit. But I have a whole laundry list of damage numbers and stacking damage buffs for us to look at next. And what I really love about this build is they're just so easy to put together. First up, Vex Mythoclast. Versus Carl in its standard fire mode, a crit registers 3,388 points of damage. Upon securing a kill, we get a 20% damage buff to activate via the Catalyst. This is only going to last for 5.5 seconds with no on-screen indicator aside from the faint bluish-white glow on the frame itself. But this is going to take the crit damage versus Carl up to 4,068. Now if we have Rain of Fire equipped, that single kill activates both the intrinsic damage buff and makes this Radiant, another 25% damage increase. Now Radiant doesn't stack with everything anymore, but we are safe here because we are pairing it with a weapon-bound damage buff. Crit damage now moves up to 5,084, since damage buffs do stack multiplicatively. So right there, we're up 50% from base. Bringing another 25% damage buff into the mix with Font of Might, which has no stacking restrictions. Multiply all three together, and we're going to see 87.5% more damage. Crits are hitting for 6,355. So in this case, Vex is actually dealing more damage per round than a slow-firing, hard-hitting 360 RPM heavy machine gun's base damage. In best case scenario, if every round lands as a crit and all 3 damage buffs are active, we're looking at 209,715 points of damage in a single magazine. And while you do need to be quick about it, it is possible because the time to empty all 33 rounds sits at 4.94 seconds. Damage per second, 42,452. Really impressive numbers for a primary weapon. But we also have the linear fusion fire mode to consider as well. Now the damage from the catalyst doesn't carry over into this mode, but it'll still redden up some cheeks with the other 2 buffs active. At base, a crit's gonna score 44,676 points of damage. If you're just Radiant or just Solar empowered, we're looking at 55,844. When both of the damage buffs are active simultaneously, 69,805. Nearly 70,000 points of damage per shot. Not too shabby considering a standard heavy linear fusion rifle crits for just over 58,000 points of damage at base. Now, you can only pocket up to 3 of these shots at one time, but that's still 209,415 points of damage. That's really close to the standard fire mode single mag damage output, but this can be delivered in only 3.2 seconds. Damage per second in the linear fusion fire mode, with both buffs active, is 65,442. And like I was saying earlier, there's really no effort required in acquiring these buffs. Get a kill and collect a well. And my favorite part, they're transferable. They're not bound to Vex. Swap weapons, they're still up. And remember how I suggested that we bring along Ascendancy? This solar rocket launcher has Explosive Light and Ambitious Assassin as standard issue perks. With Explosive Light, picking up 1 orb of power equals 1 buffed rocket. You can pile up to 6 of them, and they build even when the weapon is holstered. Explosive Light's damage increase is also 25%. So, the damage of a base rocket totals out to 80,352. With the Explosive Light perk, we're looking at 100,294. Now, if we were to swap over to Ascendancy, while Radiant and Font of Might were up and active, and we throw on a major spec just for good measure, 168,885 points of damage per rocket. Better than doubling the base damage. And if you do happen to have Ambitious Assassin procced on Ascendancy with 2 in the mag, you can touch off both rockets in 1.39 seconds, netting 337,770 points of damage. And we've yet to even talk about maybe the most powerful feature on the Rain of Fire exotic boots. The auto-reloading with Icarus Dash, and if you do have Heat Rises activated, you will get 2 air dodges. In this case, you can send off 4 rockets in just over 4.5 seconds. Well within the window of both of our time damage buffs, for a very healthy 675,540 points of damage. And that is some pretty serious burst damage. So you have the setup, you saw the damage numbers, let's talk about this build. While it does require some very specific pieces, they all flow so well together in game. I'm a fan of easy. If it's easy, I'm much more likely to make use of it. Piling up the damage buffs in this setup, like I said time and time again, is really effortless. And Vex and Rain of Fire are the pieces that make the motor run. In a lot of the game's content, just with Vex in its base fire mode, you can run through enemies like a plow truck cutting through a snowdrift. You hold forward, you shoot the enemies in the face, and they just melt. You'll have all 3 damage buffs rolling at the same time as long as there are enemies to kill. Red bars, major targets, chunkier baddies like knights or gladiators, it really doesn't matter. Vex doing heavy weapon tier damage is gonna mow them down. Then with the temporal and limiter fire mode, it does allow for some range versatility, which is something this build is lacking. The standard fire mode is going to have you covered up to mid-range. If you do need to slow your hold forward Reign of Terror for a brief moment, you can swap fire modes and pick off any troublesome targets from a distance. Then when we transfer over the Font of Might and Radiant buff to Ascendancy, it's capable of putting a serious hurt on any enemy unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end of that rocket. One trigger pull is delivering massive damage when the Explosive Light buff is factored in as well. And then because of Rain of Fire, physically reloading your weapons is a thing of the past. I mean, nothing slows you down and drops your DPS like having to pause for a reload. Rain of Fire can pretty much negate that. Then we have our buff uptimes improved. 21 seconds is a very lengthy window for Font of Might. We're paying for it with the mod slots and energy cost, but it's well worth it in my opinion. And 14 seconds isn't too shabby for Radiant either, especially given the fact it's going to refresh on every fusion rifle kill. Often this is going to give you enough time to carry the buffs between engagements, or give you the opportunity to hit for those very big damage numbers at the beginning of a boss damage phase. And while these buffs do provide a huge benefit, they're also the main flaw of this build as well. Even though the durations are increased, they're still timed damage buffs, and without ads, eventually they're going to run out. And while you're still going to be ahead of the curve with Rain of Fire in terms of potential damage output, there will be times where you're not going to have that big damage potential. Like with Kaito in the Duality Dungeon. You might have those buffs piled up for the first bell, but you're probably going to be without them for the second and third. And while some boss encounters do have plenty of ads, and that's where this build can shine the brightest. When it's an ad-free environment, or there's a long pause before the initial damage phase opens up, it's definitely going to lose some of its luster. And then there's Vex's ability or inability to deal with champions, and not just because of the fact there are no fusion rifle mods in the artifact currently. It's essentially a primary weapon wearing a special weapon name tag. On average, you're only getting 2 special weapon types with champion support from the artifact in a season, and that's opposed to 5 or 6 primary weapon types. So with Vex, anti-champion capabilities are always going to be far less frequent, and the energy costs will always be a shade higher than our primary champion mods. Not that it won't be worth it, because Vex is a very strong weapon, but its odd classification isn't doing it any favors in this respect. Lastly, I suppose this could be a pro or con, depending on your perspective. But this is an on-the-go build. It facilitates and often requires a lot of movement. I mean, we're running, we're dodging, we're in the air, we're on the ground, scrambling to pick up wells, beating feet to the next enemy to extend the damage buffs. It rewards pushing the pace. If you're someone who's more into sitting back and picking through enemies from a distance, or cozying up in a rift and standing your ground, you may hate this build. Like most things in Destiny 2, how much you're going to get out of it is heavily dependent on individual playstyle and personal preference. But I do recommend at least giving it a shot. Obviously, or I wouldn't have made this video, but there's a lot of potential and a lot of upside within this loadout. And while it might not be perfect for every Guardian or every encounter, don't be dismissive of it until you actually give it a try. But hey, if you did enjoy this video, please remember to leave it a like and consider subscribing to the Ironworker Gaming channel if you're not already, to catch more of my Destiny 2 content in the near future. If you'd like to catch me live, and not live streaming Destiny, which maybe I should do again one of these days, I have been invited to be on the Working Class Nerds podcast on August 11th. I'll send out another reminder a little bit closer to the date, but hey, something to look forward to. But regarding the build, if you do have any additional thoughts or anything to add to the conversation, feel free to drop it down in the comments. And with all that being said, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to check out this build video. You guys are awesome, and I will catch you on the next one.